All right, some of you may have seen this before. By the way, my name's Rick, and Al's on here too. And as you can see by the first slide, Al's the president of the IRG, and I'm past president. Dennis MacDonald is vice president. Gordon is secretary treasurer. By the way, all by coincidence or design, I don't know which, all members of the Fredericton Amateur Radio Club, I believe. And some of you may have seen parts of this before. We did a similar presentation a few years back and see how we make out. And I think Al has told me to go ahead and do the bulk of it since he's going to be on the phone, and he may want to add some of the history because he's been around a lot longer than I have on this file. Okay, so what is the IRG? It's this is basically our agenda. What is the IRG? A little bit of history, some infrastructure explanation, how it works, what we've been up to, some of it's updated, and why we look for membership support all the time. So we're basically a club, the same as any other club, maybe a little different in scope, but we have the same objectives as most other clubs to further interest in amateur communications and cooperation among amateurs and develop proficiency and assist in emergencies and other things that amateurs all do. We are incorporated as a not-for-profit association. We're affiliated to RAC, and we usually have meetings twice a year when there's no pandemic raging. We haven't had a meeting since COVID was declared because, as you see at the bottom, one of our main highlights of our meeting is the potluck dinner, and those are really not something you can do during the outbreaks. And we had tentatively planned a meeting in I think October, and then bang, we were back into state of emergency again. So we do have regular meetings and have elections and business and guest speakers and the usual stuff you do at meetings. And folks come from far and wide for the meetings, usually one in Doketown in the spring and one in Kingsclear usually has been the habit for the fall meeting. We have served agencies. Some of these groups and agencies we have signed memorandums of understanding with on what we do and what our role is and how they help us and vice versa. NBEMO, provincially and regionally, we help out at the provincial level and also at some of the most of the regional levels too, with regional emergency operation centers. We've signed agreements with the two health authorities to help out with their activities, because all facilities, or most facilities, or any hospital that has a emergency room also has an amateur radio installed in somewhere in the hospital for emergency use. If they were to lose communication, then they would have a means to get out via amateur radio, and that actually almost happened a couple of years back when we lost some telephone service to hospitals. And they're also used for exercises at times. And we support Environment Canada with CANWARN and the WeatherNet. And some municipalities also use the IRG system. The repeaters are available for them to use as well. This very, very brief history of the IRG. We, in the previous presentation, we had quite a long history of how some of the call signs and who was involved and sort of blow by blow of how the system grew and grew, but we're going to skip that tonight. We've covered that before. One of the first repeaters in the system was VE1PD. At one time, that was an AM repeater on Crab Mountain, still on Crab Mountain, but it was changed to FM in the 70s. The IRG was formed in 1974, and over the years, we've added repeaters, changed the system, upgraded a lot. And a lot of that was with help from grants from the federal and provincial governments. Things such as the Joint Emergency Preparedness Program, I think that was what it was called, and some other things. Some other folks that are on here probably know all about that long before I got involved. There are currently 8 repeaters. I've said 28. It's really 27 repeaters plus a repeater in Sackville that's not really a repeater. It's a radio link to the system in Nova Scotia and PEI. And Mount Carlton and Grand Lake were recent additions. They're not linked yet, but they are standalone repeaters. Mount Carlton's not actually up on top of the mountain. It's at the park the headquarters, I believe it's solar powered. It's a standalone repeater, and the one at Grand Lake is a standalone. But they are operational, and they are going to be eventually linked into the system. All the repeaters are located at government radio sites. They all have backup power. And other than the two I mentioned above there, they are all linked via the microwave relay system. So all those repeaters, and I'll explain a bit more about that later on, they are all linked with the digital microwave system. They're standalone repeaters on towers and so on, but they can be linked in various ways with the relay system. Maintenance is done by the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure techs. They are pretty much standardized repeaters, mostly Tate repeaters, and similar to what the other repeaters that they have for, or had, I should say, for things like DOT, RCMP, NB Power. A lot of the other systems were similar infrastructure. And there's additional volunteer maintenance. For example, Gordon does a lot of the programming of the controllers, the old RLC, I think they are, repeater controllers are, well, Gordon did pretty much all the programming for those. There's a typical, this is an older picture, but that's a typical repeater site. That's the Crab Mountain site. Probably changed a little bit since the picture was taken, and our antennas occupy the top. We shared the antennas with other services for the most part. Now we're probably pretty much the only ones on some of those 2 meter or that area repeater. That type of antenna bay at the top is pretty much where we share space with other services too. I believe it's. I think we're up there. And they all have microwave. For example, this is the Stanley site. Much taller tower. It has all the fancy bells and whistles of all their new systems on there. A lot of their digital and TMR systems are all on there. They service things such as NB, ambulance NB, public service, or public safety, I should say, DNR, DOT, all the government systems are all pretty much housed in all these repeater sites. And they also have a lot of sites now that they use with NBTEL, I believe, or I should say Bell Mobility. So that's the Stanley site. I think that's a recent picture. Thanks to Charles for the picture. Anything you want to add about that one, Charles?
We were actually, three of us went for a little drive one Saturday afternoon and stopped by that site at the gate, and we stopped by on Cardigan as well. But I think that tower is, I think it's 500. I'm not sure, but it's definitely more than 300 feet. And there's 700 meg stuff on there, and of course microwave and UHF and VHF on it. I think there's a possibility to put a UHF ham on there as well. It's just a matter of reprogramming.
Right. That's the typical setup they have at a lot of their sites. St. George is similar. A lot of the other ones are very similar setup. And thanks for the picture for that. And also, Charles, also back a while ago, I believe this was when you were doing some install. I think this is the VE1BM site, Charles. Am I right? This is the bank of cans inside the building there at the VE1BM site. Am I right on that, Charles?
That's right. That's cans for BM, and also the new V9FNB, and New Maryland Fire Department, and a couple other services. They have 4 cans for each receiver and transmitter.
Yep. Of course, these would all be all the services that are serviced on a typical tower site, and ours would be the IRG setup would be one of those bunches. And also at the BM site that's basically when we get into the discussion of how the thing is all set up. All the audio on all the repeaters is fed via the microwave system to that site. It used to be that the sites, the repeater controllers were at various sites and maybe linked up a few repeaters in an area. When we did the big reconfiguration, maybe, what was that, I don't know, 8-10 years ago, all the controllers were placed into Fredericton, and all the audio is fed into the system in Fredericton and then spit back out to all the sites via microwave. The repeaters are standalone as they are, but all the audio can also be fed to Fredericton and back out to each repeater site. And we'll see a bit more of that in a while. But anyways, that's all the wiring for the entire provincial IRG system right in that rack, I believe. That's right, Charles?
That's right. And over on the left side, the next rack over has the fusion repeater with the gray case showing. That's it. And then just about a foot above it is the Tate 7000 series, I believe, Baker mic repeater.
So that's when they did all the reconfiguration, everything all went into this rack. Now there's advantages and disadvantages. If that building were to explode, then we might not have linking out to all the repeaters. The repeaters wouldn't all go off the air, they'd still work, but the linking might not be any good, but we probably have ways around that. The last number of years, we've had repeaters added in Grand Falls, St. George, as I mentioned earlier, Mount Carlton, Grand Lake. And Stanley was always out there as sort of standalone, and then when they were able to add some capacity out there, we were able to get that linked into the system. It's still standalone, as it's not linked in with any other repeater, but it can be linked to other zones. And that all took place, I mentioned, in the upgrade of all the DOTI infrastructure. That upgrade took place in 2014. We sort of rode along on the coattails of that and got a lot of additional work done. And the map, if you've seen the map on the website, ve9irg.net, that has the details of the repeaters and the links. This is basically the block diagram of what's linked. For example, if we look at the EMO zone, the VE1BM repeater, and St. George and St. John are all sort of hard, they are hard linked for audio purposes. So if you speak in Fredericton, you're going to be heard in St. George and St. John. Likewise, if you speak in Campbellton on that repeater up here, you're going to be heard in these other three repeaters as well. So those zones are hard linked in accordance with these dotted lines. So Acadie, Moncton, and Sackville are hard linked. You can link any of these zones to another zone. For example, if you're in Canterbury and want to talk to Sackville, you would link from the west zone over to the east zone. You don't have to hopscotch around or anything. It's directly from this repeater to that zone there. And so you'd be heard on these three repeaters and these three repeaters if you link these zones. Likewise, if you're in Edmundston and want to talk to Moncton, and there's our controversial ID going off. If you're in Edmundston and want to talk to Moncton, well, you just link from this zone to that zone. No hopscotching or linking up intermediary. It's all handled by the digital microwave system and the controllers at the BM site. I mentioned earlier the Nova Scotia link. There's a radio at the Sackville site. It's not the Sackville repeater, so if you link up to this, you're not interfering with this repeater. You're linking to a separate radio here at the same site, but it links to the Nova Scotia Mavcom system. Once you're linked there, you can link up using their tones and codes to link to their linked repeaters. And again, from anywhere, any of these zones can link to that. Any questions on that? I mean, the the map is available publicly on the IRG website.
Rick, is there any plan to link Stanley with anything?
Yes. Stanley and Grove Hill are sort of off on their own, not linked. It's sort of it was just the number of ports we had available when the reconfiguration was done in 2014. We had a certain number of controllers and a certain number of ports, and Stanley not being in the system at the time, it sort of got just put off on its own when it was linked up. And there is a plan if we get another, I think we're going to acquire another, I don't know, 4-port or 8-port controller, and we're going to do some reconfiguration, maybe split some of these up a little bit more and have another zone. But that's all been put on hold with COVID. The DOTI folks, it's quite a major project to redo all that wiring and programming, and it sort of has to be done at a time when they're not just handling priority stuff. And by the way, they are on strike at this time too. But eventually that will be linked in with another zone. It may be added to an existing zone. There may be some changes to move some of these around. It was a juggling act to get everything into a port in 2014. There's some overlap in areas where you may, for instance, we set it up in such a way that if a repeater went bad, let's say if Fredericton in this zone went bad or this whole zone went out, then there'd still be maybe, the BM repeater might be available if Crab Mountain and all those other ones went out. It'd still be coverage for Fredericton. St. John, for example, does have coverage of 2 or 3 repeaters. Maces Bay will reach into St. John. So there's some overlap in most of these areas to provide for some redundancy if something does go off, either a zone or a repeater goes off. We wanted to try to have some overlap to provide redundancy. The digital microwave system, I'm going to credit Steve, the E1BCL, for providing this because I don't understand it all, but it's a fractional T1 system running over an Alcatel digital microwave system. It's set up, each site set up like a telco central office, like your telephone system. And the audio is, as I mentioned, all muxed and demuxed at the site by ADTRAN channel banks and so on. And it's all the time, all the audio is going through Fredericton. That's why when you do hit a DTMF code, the controllers in Fredericton act on that and do what they need to do in Fredericton and do the switching there. So even though you might be in Fredericton and they're not hearing you in Bathurst, or let's say you're in Bathurst talking, your audio is being fed all the time to Fredericton, and it's not being listened to by anybody, but except for the controllers in the building. And when those repeater controllers hear a DTMF tone, they'll do the switching that needs to be done and then send the audio out to where it needs to go. So I mentioned, and the map showed 9 zones. The repeaters are always linked, usually 3 or 4 in a zone. And I mentioned about the trying to cover the geographical, looking at highways with a bunch of repeaters along a highway, so you don't have to switch repeaters. You can talk on one repeater and someone on the other end of the stretch of highway will hear you on another repeater on the other end, and redundancy and robustness was our goal. I mentioned the link to Nova Scotia and Prince Edward Island. That's available to link to their system, which is not quite the same system as ours, so keep that in mind. They have different type of linking over there. When we did it, we left a few ports available at that time for IRLP, Echolink, or maybe some digital bridging, but that's a ways off. We have enough problems trying to keep it going as it is without getting into some more stuff, but we are trying to think someday to put Echolink and IRLP in there as well. And as I mentioned, things have been delayed for a year and a half or more because of COVID-19. Zones can be linked to any other or all at once. We do, for the nets, we usually do the all links on, but there are some nets that use just some zones. They link a couple of zones, or you can link from one zone to another, as I mentioned earlier. Make sure you unlink when it's done, because unlike some other, in Nova Scotia, for example, if there's no activity, it will unlink automatically. That's not the case here in all cases. So be sure to unlink when you're done, or else it might stay up and cause problems for anybody else trying to link. And remember, even though you're linking maybe one zone to another zone, some of those zones share a controller. So if you link to, I might not get the zones exactly right here, but if you link to Edmundston, for example, you might be tying up 8 repeaters instead of just 4, because 8 repeaters might be on that controller. So try to keep your link activity short and sweet, and make sure you unlink when you're done. You do that with your DTMF keypad microphone. If you don't have a DTMF keypad, or memories that have DTMF in your radio, you can use I've used my cell phone speaker at times. I just, as if I'm dialing a number, and the tones will come up on my cell phone. And if you've got one of those old Radio Shack pocket dialers, they'll work, or an old phone. Put the mic up to the earpiece of the phone, and you can send out DTMF tones that work. And you'll hear a confirmation back. For example, if you link to Northwest Zone, you'll hear the little voice say Northwest Zone, link on. And just make sure you identify as you're going along, and when you do link up, listen, because people might be talking there, and don't start talking over them right in the middle of their conversation. Sometimes we've had people wonder what's going on. It sounds like someone's on Vox, like they'll be talking and the background noise will drop out and then their voice will come in. Well, it's just bandwidth saving feature on the microwave. Since we're sharing with other folks, if the microwave is fairly busy, it will cut back audio and take out any dead spots. So just the voice will go through and the background noise or hiss will be gone. And some people think it's Vox, but it's just the microwave characteristic at certain times. And sometimes there's a little delay. You might get a half a second delay from when you key up to when the audio comes out in the other end. So make sure you key up, pause, and then you talk, because they might miss the first they might miss the first half second of your call sign or what you're saying to them. Their timeout timers are 3 or 4 minutes on most of the repeaters. So if you do want to avoid getting timed out, you do have to let the repeaters drop out completely for 2 to 3 seconds. Just unkeying and keying right back up again within a half second won't do it. So you got to let it drop every now and then to avoid the repeaters from timing out. IRG's been involved in some of these things. Some of these are old, like the distracted driving legislation. Remember when that came in? We were basically prohibited from using our radios in vehicles, and we did lots of lobbying and finally got an exemption for amateur radio operators. You can use your radios in your cars. And we were involved in the hospital radio project, getting the amateur radios installed in hospitals. Some of them had them before, and some of them had radios that were left over from other services. When they changed over to the digital system, we were able to abscond some of those radios and put them in hospitals and other places as well. We've been involved in some of the exercises that are listed there. And every now and then you may hear an exercise come up in relation to COVID. It's not a communication emergency, but we have been involved in some of the nets for that. IRG membership's only $15 a year, and all we have to show the government that we have people out there that might be able to help out in emergencies is to show them that we've got a bunch of people that support the system. You can do it on the website or give it to Gordon. And the system is available to all. And as I always say about any group, anyone can complain. Anyone can complain, but only members have a vote. So if you want to get involved, join up. And that's it for that presentation. I know Malcolm said something about the weather net. You probably hear the weather net in the mornings. We've started that up again. We do gather observations for Environment and Climate Change Canada every morning. Scott is going to be VE1CSA, is going to be one of the controllers this year on the weekends. So that information is used by Environment Canada. It might appear on their weather summaries, or media uses it. So if you want to join in with that, no problem to give an observation now and then. That's the presentation I had. If Al, you had anything else you wanted to join in there with, I think you're on the phone. Go ahead.
Jerry was asking, I think it was Jerry asking about Stanley and Grove Hill. They are standalone, but Jerry, they can be, if you can get into them, you can use that, say the Stanley repeater to link to the other parts of the IRG network, if I'm correct, Rick? Same as with Grove Hill?
That's correct. Yeah, if you're on the Stanley repeater, you can link to Graham and Ann or wherever, any of the other repeaters from Stanley or Grove Hill. Yes.
And when the IRG net is on, they're always on the Grove Hill and are on Stanley, Grove Hill, and Stanley.
Correct.
Right on. Just wanted to be sure because they're all on when we have the whole network on. Just as long as Jerry understands what we're saying about those.
Yeah, I might not have said it correctly, but yeah, they are linked. They're just standalone. They're not linked to, the audio's not linked to anybody else at the time, but you can link them to anywhere else at any time.
Thank you for that, Al. Another question, Rick. What frequency is the weather net on?
It's on all those repeaters every morning.
Oh, only on VHF, right?
And UHF on Mesas Bay. It's on all the IRG repeaters. If I go back to the map, it's on all.
Okay. Oh, okay. All right. Not on HF then.
No, there used to be an HF weather net on 3770, I believe. Jerry in Nova Scotia used to do that, and he's not doing that now.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions anyone might have? I'll try to answer them, or Al might do the same. And otherwise, that's the rundown. I probably took too much time.
No, I think that was good. I had a question about, I've only heard folks link into Nova Scotia a couple of times. So you use that Nova Scotia link, and thereafter you use the like their MavCon linkings. And I guess I don't really understand it very well. They have what they call the backbone when they're linking multiple repeaters, I think. It's a bit not as straightforward as the IRG, it would seem.
Yeah, their system is a little different. When you link to that repeater at Sackville, not the SKV one, it's a separate radio. It goes by, I believe it's a UHF link to Spring Hill, and then Spring Hill is listening for tones and all that. And then once you get there, then you have to punch in the number for whichever repeater you want in Nova Scotia. I do it a couple times a week. I usually get on St. George repeater, and folks in Fredericton and St. John might hear me do that. Scott does it every now and then, a couple times a week. We're just checking it out. They have a net there every morning, but we usually link in there and check in and then drop back out again after a short time. But it seems to work. I've done it from the other direction too. If you're in Nova Scotia, you link from one of their repeaters to you turn their repeater onto the backbone, and then you link back through this way to one of these zones. So it's the same thing. Once you link to this radio down here in Sackville, then you can link to any of these other zones here, or in PEI.
Yeah, there's I think I've heard a net on, I think at 8 or so. Would that be right?
Yeah, they actually start at 7:30, go till about 8:30 every morning. They call it the wake up net, and it's basically just a check-in net. Lots of folks checking in there, and you can go on Echolink and do the same thing on some of their repeaters as well.
Okay.
With that, I'll if anybody else has any questions, I'll try to answer them. And thanks for the chance to wave the flag again and again. The $15 will not pay for all this infrastructure. It's basically to help us when we want to buy a repeater controller that might not be covered by the DOT budget, but we buy that, and then they look after doing the installation. But there's various departments that cover that, like DOT might bill back to public safety, and we've been very good at having their cooperation in getting equipment repaired and replaced at times. Some of it is spare equipment, some of it is equipment that they had extra of, and we've had great cooperation from public safety and DOTI and other departments, because they know that if all goes down, that we're all they got, and we're a robust system that works.
Yeah, it's a good system. The other question I asked you, you said the IDing is controversial. Why do you say that?
Well, there are two schools of thought. There are people that say that repeaters have to ID every half hour. I don't agree with that. And there are people that say we should shut them off because they're a nuisance and annoying when they're going off all the time. And I tend to agree with that too. So we may look at doing something different for the ID. They all tend to go off every half hour. And some of the zones where you have 3 or 4 repeaters, because of the setup, they all have to repeat. They all send the ID out for all 4 repeaters in a 4-minute interval, which, again, that's, some people want them shut off. Some people, they like to hear them because they know the radios are working. So we'll talk about that at the next IRG meeting, I guess. Right, Al?
Yes.
Again, everything has a plus side and a minus side. So you weigh all those things and the members will make the decision, I guess.
Super. Any more questions for Rick or Al? That's great. I'd like to thank both of you for the presentation. It's quite a robust system we have in the province, and I haven't done a lot of linking personally, but it seems fairly straightforward compared to some of the other setups. So yeah, it's a great asset in the province. So thank you for doing this. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.